You're live.
Wake up!
Live, ladies and gentlemen.
Wake up!
We are live right now. Welcome to the Proper Perspective.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!
Now you get the idea of what we're trying to do around here. Let me add to the stage and let me start this thing off with this statement right here.
You go to Nigeria, which is, if not the most corrupt nation in Africa.
Why should somebody who...
Well, what do you know?
When a people are taught to forget their past, someone else gets to decide their future.
Say what?
Memory is a form of resistance. There comes a moment when knowing the truth isn't enough. That's when a people must decide, will they act or remain controlled? When a people are taught to forget their past,
We'll say that again.
someone else gets to decide their future. Memory is a form of resistance. There comes a moment when knowing the truth isn't enough. That's when a people must decide, will they act or remain controlled? When a people are taught to forget their past,
When the people
someone
are
else
taught
gets to decide their future.
to forget their past,
Memory is a form of resistance. When a people are taught to forget their past, someone else gets to decide their future.
memory is a form of resistance. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're getting ready to get into tonight. Welcome. Peace to all the positive people in the universe. It's your brother Shabazz, sometimes Professor Shabazz. We get those checks right. What's good, Richard, Virginia? What's good, everybody? Big up, Virginia. Hotep to the Pan-African world, and I'm going to keep using that word, Hotep. And anybody else that knows how to put puzzle pieces together and look beyond the smoke and mirrors so we can get to the truth. Now, what are we talking about tonight? Let me see. Where's the title of tonight's episode? I had it up here somewhere, and now it's gone. And wouldn't you know it, it would be gone again. No, hold on. That was it. So what are we talking about? We're talking about African agency, African resistance. Yeah, we still on that. So tonight we're going a little bit deeper. And let's see what we're gonna. Let me put this on the side screen and see what we got going on. I am wasting time a little bit on purpose and a little bit not on purpose, but let me see where my assets are because I want to make sure. Turn this mic down. And I wanted to get the music going. And now it looks like the music ain't coming. Well, ain't that something?
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Take the pillow.
All right, we got something going on here. Well, the rest of it is apparently is gone. I don't know what happened to the sounds. There you go. I don't know why it's not showing on my screen. So that's odd. Okay, well, so we don't have the sounds. We don't have the background music anymore. Don't know why. Try to close all this stuff out. There we go. There we go. Now we're getting ready to get started. So let me make sure the music is sounding right. We got the music going. We got my little Malcolm X quote. And what are we talking about tonight? African resistance. We are talking about African resistance. Let me make sure I got everything situated the way it's supposed to be. And I'm supposed to be sending off some invites. We don't have the invites here. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is your brother Shabazz. This is the Proper Perspective. Well, we just go ahead and get it started. Hopefully the people will show up. So what we gonna talk about tonight? For centuries, this stuff has been going on. And I don't know where it has gone again. There we go. So I'm gonna turn this music down. So for centuries, Africa has been misrepresented in Western histories as a continent that freely traded its own people. Now this again came up in conversation and in response to some ignorant statements that was made a couple of days ago, and I just decided we gonna stick with it, give you some more information. So today we're going to examine the evidence carefully, but not just in terms of who traded what. We will also interrogate the very language that we use. That's right, we're going to interrogate the very language that we use. Because terms like slave, slavery, let me see. Peace, Mr. K. Peace, Mr. K, for showing up. We are going to let Africa speak. If you read between the lines, then you know what I'm talking about. I got to say shout out to Kevin, a.k.a. Mr. K. He sent me a very interesting website. And I'm using that as the basis, the bare bones, the skeleton, so to speak, for what we're talking about tonight. Now, the website, and I may put it on the screen a little bit later, the website goes over a history of African resistance. So what we're doing is we're getting to the truth and the facts of who did what. But like I said, we're going to interrogate the very language that we use when this topic comes up. Terms like slave and slavery, they carry meanings rooted in European legal and cultural frameworks. So Mr. K says, Culpability of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, a multidisciplinary by Abdul Karim Bangura is a must-read book. I got to add this one to my collection as well. So terms like slave and slavery carry meanings rooted in European legal and cultural frameworks. Notions of perpetual ownership, perpetual commodification, racialized chattel slavery. This is the gift to the world from the European mind. Now, many African societies did not conceptualize unfree labor in this way. Well, why do I say it that way? Why am I saying it this way? He is saying that there was no such thing as unfree labor. I'm saying unfree labor in African, in many or most traditional African societies is eons away from what the European created during the Maafa, during the transatlantic slave era. So to reflect African experiences more accurately, to contemplate, to consider, to discuss, to analyze the African context of unfree labor more accurately, more effectively, scholars, and some of these scholars are from the Eurocentric world, and some of these scholars are from the Afrocentric world. But there are terms that they have introduced into the language, introduced into the conversation that should be used. One of them already said, Maafa. Now, if you're familiar with Kiswahili, then you may already know this other term. It's called Mangamizi. Now, I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong, if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I do have a bit of the lazy American tongue. Most linguists will say that English is one of the laziest languages. And hey, it is what it is. But I'm gonna put this word on the screen so that you can see what we're talking about. And I'm gonna put them both on the screen. They're both Kiswahili terms. So Mangamizi versus Maafa. Now, essentially, they kind of sort of resonate upon the same idea. Mangamizi is an African-centered term from the Kiswahili language, and it involves, it describes systems of exploitation and oppression which affect African peoples. In particular, so that's manganese. Now, the next term, vocabulary, is Maafa. Now, Maafa is the Kiswahili term for great disaster, widely used to describe the long, systemic catastrophes of what? Of the transatlantic slave trade and the colonial violence that's that came along with it. I should say it that way. Now, so these are the terms that we should be using. Just like now, and you may be aware, just like for instance, there's this idea that floats around. Don't call our ancestors slaves. Call them enslaved Africans, because enslaved African connotes that there was a human, that there was a personality, that there was a real living being, whereas slave connotes an object of dehumanization. So we're talking about the same thing. Words matter. The words that you use matter. Now I'll give you a scholarly note. Historian David Eltis. Now, don't go shooting the messenger. He is a white guy. But he emphasizes, let me see, hold on. Shout out to Coco Mystery. Greetings, peace, assalamu alaikum, hotep, hujambo. Thank you for showing up. Greetings from the motherland. I appreciate that. Now, let's see. Mr. K says, you could say unpaid labor in the vein of indentured servitude during ancient times, pre-transatlantic slave trade, is the equivalent of the community service unpaid labor in modern times today. And I would to some extent, I would agree with that. Especially the indentured servitude element and component. I may sidestep indentured servitude a little bit as we go on, but not that much. So the time zones are what make me miss your lives. Oh, that's right. Yeah, because you're in South Africa. Today I made a way. I am so great. I appreciate it. I'm grateful for that. I had started this thing before where I was trying to like figure out what's the best times for me to try to go live. And I was trying to like sandwich in, get a time that's like the average, what would hit like, you know, so I'd be at like, if I do 12 o'clock in the middle of the day in the United States, and what times that would be. But I'm gonna get it there soon. I'm gonna get it there. But I do appreciate you for taking the time and showing up and catching this. That indeed, stop calling them African slaves. Sawubona, sawubona. Thank you for teaching me a new word. Now, so again, as I was saying, scholarly note, historian David Eltis emphasizes that slavery in the old world differed significantly from what in the New World, in the Western Hemisphere, under the Yurugu, came to be known as the brutal, racialized chattel slavery that developed once Yurugu got in charge of everything. Now, no, David Eltis didn't say Yurugu. That's just me using an Afrocentric scholastic term. But if you wanted to check out his work, it's the Cambridge World History of Slavery by David Eltis. Now I'll give you the Afrocentric perspective, lens. Marimba Ani, African-American scholar, not FBA scholar, African-American scholar. Now she popularized the term Maafa to capture this total system of historical violence beyond just the commercial trade, encapsulating everything. Yes, indeed, we will figure it out. So, you can, if you want to read more about Marimba Ani's dealings with this issue, then go get yourself a copy of Yorugu. You will hear me use that word quite a lot. There's a reason for it. So you should get the book Yorugu. Now, we're going to move into this thing a little bit. Now, section 1, pre-colonial African systems of unfree labor. Now, I'm going to try to put this on the screen. This is for a couple of reasons. One, let's see. Hopefully, when I start clipping up these long form videos, you'll see this on as the section that we're talking from. So, pre-colonial African systems of unfree labor. So what we have here is internal African unfree labor versus external trade. That's the difference. Internal unfree labor, meaning on the continent, and there is a social order in the society, whichever kingdom, whichever ethnicity we start looking at. So all societies will have some sphere of unfree labor, but not all societies sent their unfree labor outside. That's the external trade. In many African societies, captives of war, criminals, or debtors could be integrated into households or kinship networks rather than treated as perpetual property. So that even when you have these divisions of society, these divisions of labor, even when you have them within the society, you think of the idea of a totem pole. And obviously the royals, the kings, the elites are at the top. And then you got nobles, and then you got like artisans and craftsmen and skilled professionals, and then you got common folk, and then down at the bottom you have people, war captives, unfree labor, debtors, unfree labor. So even in that bottom category, the individuals in this category are not always or are not treated as objectified products, if you get what I'm saying. They're not looked at as dehumanized tools that can be used and sold and bought. They're just in the lowest class of the society, but they can maneuver and manage and work themselves up. And so scholars caution against collapsing all of these practices into the single Western category of slavery. See, the scholars already know. The scholars know, well, what was going on in Africa ain't nothing like what we was doing. The European scholars I'm talking about. So most descriptions of slavery come from European observers who often applied their own terms to African systems that they didn't understand and they didn't care to understand. Now, you know I have to come with the receipt, so let me throw this receipt on the screen. Where'd it go? Nope. I don't know. Okay, throw this receipt on the screen. So you can check out that work, Slavery in Africa, published in 1977 by Myers and Kopitoff. Now, we got another scholar, Susan Myers. Yes, another white British scholar. Plenty of them do this work. And Igor Kopitoff. And he's a white Russian American anthropologist. So all of these scholars are looking at this stuff and they're saying, wait a minute, no, people got it wrong. What was going on the continent is not what we thought it was, it's not what we were calling it, it's not what it should be looked at as. And so now these scholars, they say that the arrangements aren't often allowed. I'm saying that wrong. What they're saying is in the African societies on the continent, there are arrangements that are often allowed when it comes to this indentured servitude class, this quote unquote enslaved class, this quote unquote debtor, war captive class. Because most often there were pathways to freedom. There was marriage and social integration. Social integration. That is clearly not something that took place. It hardly takes place today. It certainly didn't take place during the hoorah era. Labor for household or community needs rather than sale as commodities. So now we'll come to this idea, examples of African systems. And what I mean, and I'm doing this because this is continent wide. So you have Axum in Ethiopia. Now Axum traded in ivory and gold and incense. Axum didn't trade in humans for export. Now, yeah, there was some internal servitude that existed later. Axum is an ancient society. Axum is an ancient civilization. Axum existed before Christianity. Now, once Christianity started to creep into the culture and the civilization, there was a little bit of internal servitude that found its way into the society. Don't believe me? You can look up a brother by the name of Pankhurst. Now put that one on the screen. Here we go. No. So Pankhurst is the one, the text, the book. So Pankhurst, A Social History of Ethiopia, is where you'll find that information. Now, again, that's Ethiopia. Yeah, that's over there on the East Coast. Why you talk about them? We come from the West Coast. Okay. Well, the Asante Kingdom in modern day Ghana. Now, I will say they did have an ownership system but guess what? Their ownership system came from wars of rebellion. The economy itself was not fundamentally based on external trade. When they went to war with somebody, the loser, well, now you got to come work for us. But they were not by default, they were not by nature in the business of selling humans. Now, the Benin Empire, a lot of people like to bring up the Benin Empire. Now, the Benin Empire in modern day Nigeria, there's a king by the name of, well, I should use the proper term. There is an Oba by the name of Esigie. King Esigie, Oba Esigie, banned the export of male citizens and male slaves to Europeans in the 1530s. Again, a lot of times people want to make these sweeping generalizations. And they want to talk about, well, I know they said in 18, and I'm like, they started this whole mess in the 1400s. So in the 1400s, it was mostly kidnapping until everybody started learning the tricks of the game and was like, we got to do something about these white folks. So now the Oba Esigie in the 1530s, he banned the export of male citizens and male slaves, male underclass folks to Europeans. Now I'm gonna keep it 100 with you, because I'm trying my best to be fair, firm, consistent, and balanced. I'm not saying that Oba Esigie banned all external. There's some evidence that he only placed a ban on male citizens. So there's some evidence that female war captives, not citizens, female war captives continued to get cycled out. But the ban on male exports lasted almost 200 years. Now, later rulers who came after him and decided that they were not going to follow the SCGA model started to do some other things. But that's one kingdom who went 200 years saying no. Let me check out the comments. Let's see. So Coco says, please, can you explain about the previous maps of Africa? I have the world maps been altered with? Have the world maps been altered with? Okay, in a nutshell, yes, the world maps have been altered with. Now, I'm not necessarily sure how you mean it. I may come back later if I can pull it up. I'll come back later and pull it up, but I may get the name incorrect. The Mercator maps, I think is what it's called. But the maps have been altered. Most maps that you see, if you're looking at a map and it makes it look as though Africa is a small continent, as opposed to, for instance, the United States, which looks huge on the map, you're looking at an incorrect map. I'll put it to you that way. Now, is Southern Africa really the North? The map is everything. If you're looking at the actual, if we actually do get a chance to go up into space and you're looking down, the Nile is not, Kemet is not up here. Kemet is down here. I'll put it to you that way. Now, I may not be able to answer this next question. So what is social integration? No, I can't answer this. Social integration is the idea. I'll answer it with the opposite. In the Maafa, in the Americas, whether we're talking about the United States, whether we're talking about in Jamaica, in the Caribbean islands, in South America, there was no social integration as far as the quote unquote enslaved Africans. Once you were thrown into the enslaved category, you were always going to be enslaved. And anytime they found out that there was a problem, that there was a loophole, for instance, one of the things that I talked about before, there were several, all throughout the 400-year period, enslaved Africans were fighting back and trying to work the system to regain their freedom. So there are times when they were able to go into court and make law cases based on, okay, the rules. You said the rule was, I gotta be a slave because I live in a slave territory. Well, I'll have you know, Judge, for 5 years, this owner here had me working in free territory. So according to y'all rules, I should no longer be a slave. I should be free. Because if I'm free, now I can access social integration. Now I can make moves and do other things. So social integration is when you have access to the rest of the society. And so in African societies, even though they had these quote unquote lower class citizens or war captives and debtors, they allowed those people, if you're in debt, okay, and it wasn't money, but you owe $1,000. Well, you're gonna work on this project until your amount of labor equates to $1,000. Now you're no longer stuck and trapped. You get to go back and socially reintegrate. Over here in the West, in the Western Hemisphere, nope, you owe $1,000, and as soon as you paid it off, well, but you're a slave. What else do you want us to do? There's no social integration. And so every time there's an opportunity for an enslaved African to work the system and gain their freedom, they would just rewrite the law because the rule was no social integration. If we missed, if there was a loophole, we got to fix the loophole. So that's what social integration is in a nutshell. Let's see. Kevin, Mr. K says, Ghanaian scholar Akosua Adoma Herby, in her work, stresses that in Ghana, slaves were still regarded as human beings entitled certain to rights and privileges. The right to be fed, clothed, and housed, the right to marry, the privilege of an independent income. And so again, those are again very important distinctions, because now I'm not going to say that enslaved Africans in the West didn't marry, but enslaved Africans in the West had to get permission from the owners in order to marry. And so if the owner said, "Nah, I don't want you marrying her," then you won't get married. If the owner said, "Nah, I don't want you marrying him," then you won't get married. Because again, that's the lack of social integration. You do not have rights. No problem. Thank you for that. Thank you for asking the question. So now we're going back to this Benin thing. So like I said, you know, in Benin, they had a ban on the selling of humans, at least the absolute selling of male citizens, for almost 200 years. Now, they had some issues back then with what we gonna do with the female war captives. We can't just have a whole bunch of women out here. Well, you know, some stuff happened, and I'm not downplaying it. Again, most of this I'm taking from, I need to share the link again, but it's Let Africa Speak. But it's also coming from the Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And so look, so we've looked a little bit at the eastern region of Africa with Axum and Ethiopia. We looked a little bit with western region of Africa with Benin. Let me take you down to the southern parts of the coast, the Swahili city-states. Because in the Swahili city-states, most engaged in trade of gold and ivory and other commodities, not humans. Now, Zanzibar did become the exception. It's the world famous exception. But Zanzibar, even with Zanzibar, it wasn't until the 18th and 19th century. So again, 200, 300 years, nah, we don't do that. So something happened within the society. Some ruler takes over and some ruler decides, I want to do it this way. And that's very similar, you know, for all of the people who are so in love with American society. For all the people who think American society is this, you know, so great. Like, how's that working out for you with the orange one in office? You know, it matters when you have shifts and changes in power. So for all of the people that want to shoot shots and cast aspersions and say, oh, all them Africans did was sell us. No, the people on the ground didn't do anything, first off. And so even in the royal lineages or administrations, you will have successive administrations that said, no, we ain't doing that. You'll have one reject king that says, well, this is how I'm gonna do it. Just like we got a reject king right now. But again, so you had the Swahili states, and they didn't get involved into the 18th and 19th century, so they held off for 400 years, for 300 years almost. Let me see now. Black people are not free. I agree with that. I have come to the conclusion that all Africans, including African Americans, are under a slave system agenda of some sort. This is absolutely true. This is one of the reasons it's to some extent, it's a tenet of Pan-Africanism, that we all have a common enemy. We all are, now we may all enjoy various degrees of freedom, of comfortability, but we all still labor under a system that is not designed by us, not designed for us. So it looks different in different countries. It looks different in the global south than it does in the global north. It looks different in the eastern hemisphere than it does in the western hemisphere. But we are all operating under this blanket of white supremacy. Like now I'll give you a quote from one of my favorite hip hop groups, Q-Tip, from and now the name is, I don't know why it's skipping my memory, but he said, "All I am is one black man in a mighty big white hand." This is like quite poetic, because that's the system that we operate under the world over. And if you don't believe me, go read Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Now I'm gonna move into section 2. Let's see. How do we fight propaganda? Now, this is a good question. Now, I will say this. Fighting propaganda, to some extent, it's a 24-hour job to some extent. Like, the only way that you can fight propaganda is first you have to be aware of what it is. But if you insist on the truth, if you insist on looking for the truth, that's the first step to fighting propaganda. You have to develop your own sense of what is the truth. And you can do that just by, like, informing yourself and reading. Yeah. Plenty of people, you can go to classes, you can go to college, and you can get degrees in this stuff. But at the end of the day, the way to fight propaganda is to demand truth, to interrogate whatever it is that somebody is telling you. I used to, in some of the classrooms that I taught, I used to tell my students, I may use a lot of big words, but I guarantee you can do whatever it is I'm asking you to do. And so I'll put it to you this way. If you're involved in a relationship and something don't feel right, and you think your person is lying to you, that's propaganda. If that person is lying, that's propaganda. They're trying to fool you. They're trying to trick you. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And they're telling you half-truths. They're telling you untruths because they want to guide you towards a certain direction. Now, you know when they're doing that. Now, it's up to you to have the strength to stick to your guns and interrogate those words and interrogate those responses, because that's what propaganda is. It's false information, but it may sound true. But when you interrogate it, you will come to the conclusion. And so then all you can do is dismiss it. You're never gonna stop a propagandist. We will never stop the propaganda machine. That's what it is designed to do. It is designed to crank out misinformation 24/7. Sometimes it's done through bots on the internet. Sometimes it's done through human trolls and idiots. Yes, indeed, Q-Tip is a legend. And hip-hop is very poetic. Yes, indeed. Let me see. Kevin, Mr. K, says to Coco Mystery, basically, for starters, Africa needs a continental media industrial complex. Create a media powerhouse to counteract against the Western propaganda. Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey stressed this. Yes, indeed. Now, that's on a national, that's on a top-bottom scale, but I agree with that entirely. So now let's move into this anti-slavery and resistance. Because I want to make sure that we nail these points. African leaders, African intellectuals actively resisted slavery and slave trading within and beyond their societies. This is extremely important, within and beyond their society. Because a lot of times people say, well, no, again, the whole myth is Africans just sold other Africans. Now again, let me back up, because the question that was posed that got me on this bit of a series, perhaps. The question that was posed on Dr. Ma'at's channel was, do Pan-Africanists overlook this fact, African participation? I say absolutely not, because it's the Pan-Africans that are doing all of this teaching. The question is, or the problem is, the FBAers, the ADOSers, the ABOs, all the acronym people, the white folk who don't want to be held accountable for what their ancestors did, they want to look past their own participation. Now, there's the Imamate of Futa Toro, and I think I brought this up before. But from the foundation of Futa Toro, this is in Senegal, they banned slave trading. They intervened, and this is so significant. They intervened to free captives. So not only did they ban it, they said, no, we're not going to do it. Ain't nobody in this kingdom going to do it. When they encountered people who had been kidnapped, they freed them. And they wrote treaties to stop French traders from enslaving both Muslims and non-Muslims. Now, I got that from Let Africa Speak. So in Futa Toro, it was all hands on deck. Now you got Queen Nzinga of Ndongo, that's Angola. Now, she conducted wars to free and resettle enslaved peoples during the 17th century. I got that from Let Africa Speak. You got Ahmad Baba in Timbuktu, 17th century. Now, he was a Berber Islamic scholar. He argued against racial criteria for slavery. This is important now. I'm not saying that he argued against all slavery. He argued against racial criteria for slavery. So what he said was, okay, maybe you can have it, but you damn sure can't base it on race. You have to base it on something else, in whatever fashion it was. And even then, even in his argument, he's not arguing in favor of chattelization. That is the characterization, that is the characteristic of the Maafa. He defended the principle that free Muslims could not be enslaved based on race alone. It's got to be something else. They fell victim to a war, so they were a war captive. Now, again, for anybody that wants to say, you only telling half the story, he wasn't a perfect individual. And why do I say that? Because to some extent, he still maintained that non-Muslims could legitimately be enslaved under Islamic law. So I don't shy away from that. Again, Pan-Africans don't overlook those who do participate. Now, as to whether or not he leaned into, as to whether or not he made his maintenance of non-Muslims being legitimately enslaved, again, 17th century Timbuktu, on the continent of Africa, chattelization didn't exist. There was no internet. There was no phones. You couldn't call up anybody and be like, how's it going over there? So your concept of what slavery is still war captives, in debt, and so on. Your concept of slavery, even when you're arguing in favor of it, is they got to work for a little bit, but then they get free. They can do this, they can do that. When they go get married and have kids, their kids is going to be free. That's the concept that they are arguing in favor of when they are arguing in favor of slavery. So now let me see. Mr. K says it's more the Afrocentrics, or really I prefer to say Afro-zealots, that do the overlooking. I would say maybe the Afro-zealots, because I'm gonna say, like, I'm clearly an Afrocentric. There may be the Afro-zealots, and I would even say if it is the Afro-zealots, it's probably the younger ones, or not younger, but the ones that, like, you know, we all come into our consciousness at different times. So if you come into your Afrocentric consciousness, you know, regardless of what your age is, but when you're new to it, you might be a little overzealous. But once you know, really settle into your studies, because you can't be an Afrocentric person all willy-nilly. You have to study, whether you study in a school setting or you study on your own. Once you've done the studies, then you begin to mature and sober up. Let's see. So are the Arabs one of the colonizers of Africa? My father always says this. Is it true? I like on this channel, I have made some comments in the past about the Arabs. I usually put it this way. You got pale Arabs and you got black Arabs. The same way you got pale Jews and black Jews. Ethiopians have a thriving Jew community. The derogatory term, they used to be called falasha. I don't like using that word, but I'm not always up to speed with the most appropriate, the new terms. But when they were called the falasha, everybody knew that, oh, that's the black Jews. So they're Jews, but they're not pale. They're not the white folk. And what I say is, research from what I've seen, there were black Arabs and there were white Arabs, pale Arabs. Yes, the pale Arabs definitively had colonization in mind when they entered Kemet. I won't necessarily throw all of the Arabs under the bus, because there are, you know, sections and swaths of black Arabs. Now, some of them, you know, just like there are some black Muslims. If you look at Sudan, you got Arabized, Muslimized Africans, black Africans, and some of them do some stuff. So I don't disagree with your father. I just sort of qualify which Arabs. But Mr. K says, yeah, the Afro zealots, who basically look at Afrocentricity like a religion, and they're the evangelicals of Afrocentricity, like evangelicals are to Christianity. Again, yes, I agree. The only thing, I just try to give grace and give space, because the way I look at it, you know, they're usually, when you are a zealot, you are new to a thing. Now, hopefully, your zealousy tapers once you grow into your ministry, whatever that may be. But if you stay at that one level, yeah, you probably will have some problems. There were some Moors who would be considered black Arabs. Not all black Arabs, not all black Arabs are Moors. For the most part, the Moors were the black Arabs of West and North Africa. But there are black Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula that were not necessarily assigned the term Moor. I hope that answers the question. So again, we get back to this, the Berber scholar Ahmad Baba. Now, if you want information from the research on that one, I got all of that from V's work, Abolition of Slavery in Africa's Legal Histories, and that was published in 2020. These examples illustrate that African political, religious, and legal frameworks sometimes function as anti-slavery instruments long before colonial abolition movements. That is the key, at least for me. These activities show and prove African agency, African resistance, and they were occurring long before Europe said, we can't do this no more. So again, because you have the people, well, what about the kingdom that said they wanted to keep it going? I'm not saying that there weren't any kingdoms that said we want to keep it going. But you cannot ignore the fact that there were kingdoms that were trying to end it before Europe wanted to end it. You have to have that nuance. So now, I'm gonna move into section 3. Conceptual distinctions, why words matter. And I think I already touched on this before. The problem with the word slave and slavery, using these English words uncritically. Now we're gonna use them in one way or another. We're gonna continue using them because they are the words of today, even though we are going to push to minimize use of them. Like I said, the same way we push to minimize the use of calling our ancestors slaves, and we promote the atmosphere so that more people understand enslaved ancestor or enslaved African is most appropriate. So now here's why, because when you use these English words and you use them uncritically, you create new risks, you create new problems. You are misrepresenting African social and legal realities. You are imposing European frameworks onto pre-colonial African systems. You are obscuring forms of dependency that were not permanent or commodified. I hope you're feeling me when I'm saying this. The term slavery invites lots of misleading ambiguities, especially when applied to Africa and other non-Western societies. And that was Myers and Capital. So instead, using Mangamizi or Maafa, because they both capture both internal forms of oppression and external systems of violence. And this places African experiences at the center of the historical interpretation. That is the heart and soul, the nutshell of what Afrocentricity is supposed to be doing. Whether you're a zealot or not, Afrocentricity says center the African lens, whether it be the African on the continent or the Africans in the Western Hemisphere who descend from. When you use the English terms always and all the time, you are sanitizing, you are erasing a complex socio-political dynamic. You're not allowing those societies to exist in their natural order. So let me see what's going on in the chat. Noted. Okay, hold on. So Mr. K says basically, for starters, Africa needs a continental. Okay, no, I already read that one. Okay. All right. Oh, I see what happened. My timeline is not up to date. Now we're getting something. Is whitewashing a slave system, and how do we defeat it, especially as Black women? How do we really find our true identity again? Is whitewashing a slave system? I'm not necessarily sure what you mean by whitewashing. Like, you talking about skin bleaching, or you talking about something else? Now, Mr. K says, let's not forget, human trafficking revolts on African soil that sabotage the shipments of slave ships from the coast on African ports. Again, this is true. And one of the things that I always end up saying is, and it's a shame, part of the problem, one of the reasons that we have this large amount of, I don't want to say ignorance, but this knowledge gap, is because we don't have this needful information in our school curriculum. But I like to tell people, there were rebellions going on from the first day that they pulled us off the boats over here. Likely saying, equally so, there were rebellions going on the first day they put a chain on the African on the coast or in Africa. Now, I've already shown how, or already stated how, certain kingdoms made it their business to release the captives. And even when they did find themselves in the dungeon, even when they found themselves on a boat, they did anything and everything they could to prevent the boat from taking off. They did anything and everything they could to foil the plans. That's why some jumped overboard. That's why you had mutinies. Okay, so let me see. Coco Mystery says, I'm talking about how we have been programmed to be European and to prefer a European look. Okay, so not skin bleaching, but cosmetically, we're still talking about that kind of whitewashing. Is whitewashing a slave system? I wouldn't necessarily say it's a slave system because, like I've been saying, I don't necessarily like the word slave, but whitewashing is an artifact of white supremacy. I'll say it that way. Whitewashing is an artifact of white supremacy. White supremacy seeks to devalue that which is not white, and so because that's the general rule of the day, we all, and I literally mean all, I mean all black populations. You will see it in all brown populations. When I say black populations, I'm talking about Africans on the continent, African Americans, Jamaicans, Caribbeans, Brazilians, etc. When I say brown, I'm talking about like Indians, Afghanistan, I'm talking about Puerto Ricans, all brown folk, all red folk. Anybody that has had to live under the system of white supremacy, there is always a devaluing of their natural status, of their natural look, whatever God made them. Like, okay, even if it's stereotypical, God made the black man nappy-headed. Well, ain't nothing wrong with nappy-headed. But when you live in a white supremacist world, nappy-headed becomes devalued. So whether you're male or female, you start to wonder, well, what if I straighten my hair? I wouldn't necessarily use the word slaveism. I would say but I would say it's an artifact of white supremacy. It is a result of white supremacy. Now, I'm also referencing to the rumors or facts that some white historical figures were actually black. Rumors of facts that some white historical figures were actually black. I'm probably not going to go too far down that road. If you gave me a specific example, I might say, I might end up saying, that's pseudo. Some of the stuff that I have heard in the so-called conscious community, they really go off the rails when some of that stuff pops up. So I'm not sure what you mean, but I know, for instance, I have heard people making the argument that King James was really a black man. King James of England was really a black man, and I'm not going there. That is so pseudo. So now, if that's what you meant, I'm like, nah, that's all pseudo. Now, Mr. K says, I always say, just like not all slave results were success stories on Atlantic soils, not all human trafficking shipments were success stories from African soil. That is right. That is absolutely right. Like, you win some, you lose some. But it is important to know, like, what I would say is what everybody should do. You know, it's great if we all say we need to just go buy these books and read and inform ourselves. That's great. And that is something that we need to do. But more importantly than that, we should be pushing wherever we are. I'm not sure where Mr. K is, but Coco Mystery is in South Africa. I'm in Virginia. Wherever we are, we should be trying to push for the school boards, or whatever you would call it in your area. The school curriculums need to be updated, evaluated, and this information needs to be in there, because our children should be taught in a systematic manner from the first day of school, kindergarten, or whatever else it might be called. Correct and accurate information. Okay, that's what's up. Okay, so Mr. K is in London, England. Okay. So yeah, so like this information needs to be in the curriculum. And I like to say, if you get it into the curriculum, you will see a change in the black societies in one generation. Because if you think about it, many of us come into the conscious community. Some of us come in like during our high school years or whatever, but many of us come into this information after high school. So just think, if if you had an entire generation of black people in America, in London, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, and they all for 12 years, they come up learning all of this information that we learned post high school, you will have a completely different generation and society. Now, Coco Missy says there's a picture of Abraham Lincoln in the Library of Congress, and he looks like a Somalian man. Rumors in Africa say he abolished slavery because he was black. I've heard some stuff about Abraham Lincoln. Now, I will say, I would sooner say it's pseudo. The only reason I'm not gonna go hardcore and say it's pseudo is because there is some verifiable information that Abraham Lincoln is Melungeon. I'm not saying it's 100%. There is some information about him being a Melungeon, and by definition, a Melungeon is a person of three mixtures. Like over here in America, there was Native Americans, there was the European descendants, and then there was the Africans. When all three ended up getting together, if a Native American got with a European, and then they had a child, and so that child grows up half Native, half European, and then they got with a child who was the offspring of a European and an African. So now so you get this Melungeon, this mix, this three-part thing. And I know I'm saying this wrong. Don't shoot me. I said thing. I'm not talking about the human. I'm not dehumanizing anybody. But a Melungeon is a person of triple mixed heritage ancestry. So you will get some Melungeons that kind of look like, they might look, Somalian-ish. They might look mixed in that way. Now, I don't know that the information that is out there has been 100% vetted, peer reviewed, and documented to say with beyond a shadow of a doubt that Abraham Lincoln was not a white man, he was a mixed man or a black man. But there's some stuff out there. Now, a lot of times the information does come to the community through pseudo sources. And so that's what has people not necessarily trusting it. But I wouldn't bet $1. I would not be betting not even $1 on that. As much as the English colonized Africa, they were great allies to us in apartheid against the Afrikaner oppressors. So shout out. Yeah, and I recognize that, and I would agree. I would say there may have been some other reasons, but it doesn't really matter. You don't care who your friends are when you're in trouble. So whoever your friend, whoever comes to help you when you're in trouble, yeah, shout out to them. For instance, there was an African presence within the Roman Empire. Yes, but some Afro zealots get carried away and blackface the Romans and make the Roman Empire black. That's exactly why I'm hedging my bets. That's exactly why I'm saying, it's a lot of pseudo information out there. You really got to go deep down to figure out which ones there were truly, literally, there were blacks in the Roman Empire. I believe there were 2 or maybe 3 that were actual, like, if king is not the right word, then within the royal administrative class. But the Roman civilization was a white civilization, period, in the day. So those who want to go far, that's not Afrocentric. That's something else. Now, hold on. Let me see. Let me make sure let me get to my next section, and then I'm gonna come back to these questions. These questions are powerful, and I do appreciate. Let me see. African-centered terminology in scholarship. Now, again, I have already talked about this a little bit, but so Maafa, the key Swahili term highlighting the systemic catastrophe of centuries-long exploitation of African peoples. That's Marimba Ani. Mangamizi focuses on structures of violence and forced labor in African contexts. Now, some people say, I do believe you can get some more information about Mangamizi if you look up Dr. Malana Karenga. but these terms circumvent Western notions of chattel slavery and foreground African agency, resistance, and social structures. So now let me see, where are we? Pre-colonial African societies had diverse systems of unfree labor. We started with that at the top. Let's see. Hold on. Right, now it's like when Clyde Winters gets pseudo and claims there are a hidden legacy of foundational black Brits just because there's a long history of black presence in Britain. Hey, you preach it to the choir. You preach it to the choir. So this section 4 that we're talking about, these takeaways, pre-colonial African societies. Like I said before, yes, there are systems of unfree labor, but they integrated captives into society. Some used punishment labor, some engaged in limited trade, none of which universally mirror European chattel slavery. So again, that circles back to the question Coco Mystery asked about social integration. Many African leaders, many African states, many African thinkers actively resisted enslavement, both internal and external. So this is why scholars have said we need to stop using words like slave and slavery, start using terms like Maafa and Mangamizi to center the African experience, to avoid misrepresenting history through the lens of European legal and economic categories. And so again, I just want to say the scholarly consensus emphasizes that language shapes interpretation. So to be accurate, we must be Africans. We must use African-centered terminology. We must explain historical nuances. And again, this is also how you challenge and defeat propaganda. So if we're going to be serious about these kinds of conversations, we must interrogate the language. What do you mean? And why would you put it that way? Let me see. Okay, so now let me get back to some of these questions. That's all I got for this presentation tonight. Whoo! Yes, Mr. K. To Coco Mystery. Hidden Colors was pseudo and full of plagiarism. Talking Points by Tariq Nasheed. Now I'm gonna say this. And I had this conversation with my cousin, Dr. Dennis Assault Winkler, and I think he's either going live or he's either getting ready to go live or he is actually live now. Once I sign off here, I'm gonna go check out his channel. So you should come over there too, Dr. Dennis Assault Winkler on YouTube. I had this conversation with him about Hidden Colors. Now I'll say this because I personally was so excited. Not for me personally, but I was excited because I was encountering a lot of young black people, a lot of young African Americans who were all of a sudden excited to learn about black history, African history, when Hidden Colors came out. And so I was like, thank God, because I'm teaching classes and they don't want to hear nothing. So I was grateful that the documentary was being put out there. Now, when I got my copy, I'll say I was grateful that there were some solid scholars in the mix. And the solid scholars pretty much held down the actual factual parts of the series. But he had so many pseudo brothers and sisters up there. Or maybe not sisters, but he had a lot of pseudo brothers up there. And I was just like, oh, way to fumble the bag. So one of the biggest red flags in that Hidden Colors series is how Tariq didn't have a single continental African scholar in it to give insight of continental African history. This is true. And I'm not trying to cap for Tariq. I'm like, if you were going to do that, if you're going to take on that project, in one way, shape, or form or another, it behooves you. Like, I'm not gonna say, well, you should have flown on over to Africa, I mean, you should have, but if you didn't want to do that, it's plenty of continental African scholars that live here in America and are available or accessible. So he could have done that if that's what he wanted to do. But again, even when he was working under that iteration of himself, he was operating from the framework of a Moor. Now, I'm not trying to throw a lot of shots out there. It might get me into some trouble, but you got to be careful with the Moors. You got some very good Moors. Taharka Bay in Baltimore, that's a strong, powerful Moor. But you got a lot of faulty-minded Moors. And so even when Tariq Nasheed was operating from that framework, he was a faulty-minded Moor. There's a lot of bad history with the Moors. Now, Mr. K says, I saw 5 of them and I didn't pay a single penny for any of them. I never used the word purchased. I never used the word purchased, bro. Hidden Colors one was the most pseudo one of the series. Now, I'll be honest with you. I don't remember them in such detail where I can't argue in favor or against that opinion. I remember I have watched all of them, but it was quite a few years ago. And like I said, I was more excited that I was now running into young people. At the time, I was teaching at a college, and in some of the classes that I was teaching, I'm telling you, my students, they didn't want to hear anything about history. They didn't want to hear anything about African American or African continental. All they wanted was, what chapter was we supposed to read, and is there going to be a test? And all of a sudden, this thing came out of nowhere, and they were like, hey, have you heard about, did you know such and such? So I'm going to always say I'm grateful that it came out and had a positive impact on people. But again, once you get into the knowledge, that's it. Once you get into knowledge, then you will be fundamentally let down. So let's see. Coco Mystery says, I'm currently debating with Afrikaner political followers or fans in the streets of Johannesburg. They almost made me cry. Come on now. How do I condition myself to be stronger to their racist comments and replies? That's a good question. And I honestly for you right now. And here's why. Over my years, I used to do some sparring with the white folk. But I got to a point and I realized that they are 100% committed to racism, to white supremacy. They do not care about facts. This is just my experience. So I had to recognize that I'm talking to a brick wall. I had to recognize that knowledge does not dent the bricks of white supremacy. So I just got to the point where I was just like, I'm not doing this. I'm not gonna waste my time trying to open up a mind that refuses new information. So for me, now I'm not saying that I ever got to the point where, look, if I'm gonna cry over anybody, it's gonna be a black person. Ain't no white person getting a tear out of me unless they got a gun to my head, and even then I'm probably gonna end up no longer amongst us. So I can't really give you a good answer as to how do you condition yourself to be stronger. You just got to, for one, please realize when you're dealing with those kind of people, you're not dealing with people that have an open mind or an open heart. So, like I said, I'm not the best person to talk to about that. I do apologize for not having a better answer. Hidden Colors was just entertaining to me, to where it was hilarious to watch. Phil Valentine made me laugh the most. See, I didn't want to say no names. I had been made aware of Phil Valentine even before Hidden Colors came out, and my introduction to Phil Valentine, I was just like, I got to get away from him. I can't do this. I can't believe. Like I was personally, I'm sorry, I was personally embarrassed to call myself an Afrocentric, an African-centered, a conscious community member, or anything. I was like, this is just complete pseudo nonsense. It definitely wasn't education. You know, it was entertainment. It wasn't hardly even, what did KRS One say? Edutainment. It was barely edutainment. But anyhow, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you. Let me pull this brother back up to the screen. This is what we opened with, and this is what we want to end with, so to speak.
You go to Nigeria.
And of course, it's gonna go back to the wrong page.
When a people are taught to forget their past, someone else gets to decide their future. Memory is a form of resistance. There comes a moment when knowing the truth isn't enough.
Thank you. Appreciate
That's when a people must decide, will they remain controlled. Every oppressed people reaches a breaking point. When patience runs out, determination takes its place.
Zuketo 3607, peace, proper perspective, good discussion. Thank you, brother. Thank you, appreciate that. I wanted to play my outro with Malcolm X again.
That means it's doing its job.
The vocal.
Every generation is faced with a choice.
So let me remove him from the stage. Let me stop him. Let's see if it's gonna play this time. If it's not gonna play this time, then I'm just gonna bid you brothers and sisters farewell. I don't hear it.
Power doesn't listen to requests.
For some reason,
power responds to pressure, and a united people apply pressure. No one respects the people who refuse to defend themselves. Self-respect begins the moment you draw a line and refuse to be pushed back. You don't free a people by changing their chains. You free them by changing their thinking. That's where real. When a people are taught to forget their past,
this is it. This is the close.
Someone else gets to decide their future. When a people are taught to forget their past, someone else gets to decide their future. Memory is a form of resistance. There comes a moment when knowing the truth isn't enough. That's when a people must decide, will they act or remain controlled?
You go to Nigeria.
Oh, you heard that. So you heard what he said. Memory is a form of resistance. Memory is a form of resistance. You must remember, which means we must pass the information down. When we buy a book, read it, and we see the value in it, we must tell somebody else, here's a book for you. That's why I always in my videos, that's why I'm always telling you, here's a receipt, here's a book, here's an author. We must share and spread this information. Now let's see. There you go. Appreciate that. I needed to see this. I will watch it. I hate to say this, that Malcolm X video footage is clear AI. Yeah, but the words are true. But the words are true. But the words are true. He denied his slave name and surname. He will always be remembered. Thank you. It was Queen Mother Moore. Here's another name for you can check out. Queen Mother Moore. That she fought almost her whole entire life. And one of the things that hit me was she said, especially for those of us over here in the West, when white supremacy did all that it could to take our names away. Queen Mother Moore said, don't leave this earth without getting yourself an African name. That is at least one anchor for you. She said, baby, I don't care what African name you get you, but get yourself an African name. Stop walking around with the European name. That's one thing I live by. That's why I always tell people, this is your brother Shabazz. Now, I know it's a couple of people like, that ain't no African name. That's an Arabic Islamic name. I did the math. I did the knowledge. I did the history. That's why I said there are black Arabs. I got my black name. That's not my only name. I got West African name that runs with the DNA test that I took. So I'm following Queen Mother Moore's advice. So shout out to everybody for paying attention, dropping by. participating in the conversation and the group chat and everything else. This is your brother Shabazz, sometimes Professor Shabazz. I like to start off by saying peace to all the positive people in the universe, and I like to end on the same note. What's good, Richmond, Virginia? Big up VA. Hotep to the Pan-African pro-black world, wherever you be. And everybody else that looks beyond the smoke and mirrors to put puzzle pieces together. So thank you. Coco Mystery says I learned a lot of things today. Thank you. Thank you for showing up and paying attention and joining in. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Hit that like button. Smash it as many times as you can. When you hit the notification bell, make sure you click all, because YouTube likes to play games. If you hit the notification bell, it'll default to personalized, which just means YouTube ain't gonna send you the link when I go live. But if you hit all, you'll get every time I load something up. Like, share, and subscribe, and send this video to somebody else you know that will be interested. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get on up out of here. I say peace.